time, a river that flows in one direction. Or does it? What if a single choice could reshape destiny? What if the past whispered secrets meant only for you? What if the future was not set in stone? In this video, we step beyond the veil, into the unknown, into possibility. Shuffle the deck, open your mind, and ask yourself, what if? Welcome, Tarot Maniacs, Tarot fans. I'm Annabelle. I'm a tarot practitioner for over 35 years. In this video, this is my series, What If? I get a lot of requests for what if. So we are going to take a nice deep dive into what if the Princess Royal had been born first? What if Princess Anne was actually the heir apparent and the current monarch? Really interesting topic here. So have to shout out Dave Murphy. Everybody knows him and loves him. He's on the mend. This was a request from Dave Murphy. So Dave, this one's for you. Let's bring up that card view. But before I do that, it is my birthday week. I have loaded up my weekend with lots of fun stuff. So if you would like to get a reading with me this week, now is the time. Book it, get it in there. I have time open until I think 9 o'clock on Friday night. Get in there, book something. I am your gal. I will be back to work on Tuesday. So I'll take Saturday, Sunday, and Monday off this week. So let's get crack-a-lack and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. It's a lot of fun over here. We have a great community, including Dave Murphy, who has great questions. And as always, if you have some what if questions, drop them down below. I love these what if explorations of alternate timelines. So this is a lot of fun for me as a psychic and a tarot card reader. And I highly encourage you guys to get on in there and do it. So we're going to imagine the line of succession from Queen Elizabeth, passed away, we all know, 2022. For some reason, my notes have 2023 in here. I gave her an extra year. But 2022, we lost, unfortunately, Queen Elizabeth, longest reigning monarch ever, holding that crown, holding that place. But Anne was born in 1950, which was 2 years after the current monarch, Charles III. Under modern succession laws, the 2013 Succession to the Crown Act, gender would not have mattered. Anne would have been first in line and crowned queen in 2022 at the age of 73 had she been born first. So wouldn't have been any trouble with that. We would have had no problems. If Anne was born first, how would she have prepared for her role as queen from childhood? We all know that Anne was quite outspoken as a youngster. She was her father's child through and through. Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip. She also was a very, very accomplished equestrian. She did perform and compete in the Olympics. I believe that was 1976. Let me just check that date. Let me see where my date is. I know I have it further in my notes, but she did compete in 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal. She's a member of the British team, and she rode the Queen's horse Goodwill. So that was her horse. She did suffer a concussion halfway through the course, but she remounted and finished. She states she cannot remember making the rest of the jump. So she is pretty tough chick. So how would she have prepared for her role as queen from childhood? Again, assuming that she was born first, Charles was born second. She would have been away from home. Ooh, she would not have liked this. There is a certain headstrongness about the Princess Royale, and I think that that's personality, not preparedness. I think that, or not preparation, personality, not preparation. I think she would have had some very specific request to actually be closer to the crown, closer to the factory floor, if you will. I think she really would have wanted to have gone to school nearer home base and been able to participate in more of the events with Queen Elizabeth, her mother, the then reigning monarch. I also think she would have strongly leaned into advisement from her father. Famously, Queen Elizabeth greeted a 4-year-old Charles with a handshake after some time apart. And I think that there was less of the smothering, mothering that we see with some other, parents in the royal family. Diana, I think, was very demonstrative with, William and Harry, but, I think that that was a bit, I don't wanna say a bit performative, but I do think that it was a bit performative for the royal family because they were very stuffy and proper with their children in public. We never really saw Charles, gushing and falling all over his boys. We did see affection later. I'm not saying that he didn't give affection to them, but he just wasn't so overt about it, and I'm very overt. I'm a mother and smother with my kids. I lavish them with love. So I totally understand, but I am not a monarch. I am not up here, trying to rule the kingdom or anything like that. So I do think she would have been very, very unhappy about being away from school, and I think she would have actually probably acted out about that going away for some time. She would have lobbied with her father to try and get to be closer to the factory floor. I really am going to call it the factory floor. Would her ascension after Queen Elizabeth's passing have been smooth or controversial? How would her ascension have gone? We're talking about like the administrative part of it, the workings of the inside of the castle. We would have had two different factions there. So I think one of the things that would have been very different about her and that would have struck the individuals in in the courtier pool, um, I don't think she would have been quite as warm and charming as Queen Elizabeth in private with the staff. I think she is much more matter of fact and much more pragmatic and a little acerbic. I I think like I think she was her father's child in personality. I think really she took after greatly from Prince Philip, and I think that no nonsense that we see from her, and keep in mind, she is patron or president of over 300 organizations right now. So that is pretty remarkable. So I think she's 75, 76, 75 this year. She turned 75 this year, I think. She's born in 1950. So yes, September, her birthday is August 15th, 1950. So yes, she'll be 75 this year. I think she would have been less charming. I'm not saying less kind, but I'm saying less charming than the queen. There was a certain cuddliness about the queen with the staff and the courtiers, and she really was very, very deft at handling um, that power imbalance. I think, Anne, that this Six of Pentacles is always representative of an imbalance of power. There's generosity in that card, but there's an imbalance and an inherent imbalance of power handing over to those that need. And I don't think that Anne quite had the chops to demonstrate kindness. I think it would have been much more like Prince Philip, but that's okay. I think there would have been a mixed bag on the inside. How would the public, would the ascension have been smooth or controversial for the public? See how the public, the subjects. I think we would have had the same kind of the end of an era that we experienced when Charles ascended to the throne. There was a little bit, especially on my part, that we will never see the likes of a reign like that again. The royal family is changing. They now have USB plugs in the walls. They don't, it's not the same. I know that sounds like a weird thing, but it's just not the same monarchy that it was. And is it the last great monarchy on the face of the earth? Perhaps it is. Some of the other European royal lines, famously the Russian and French lines that were severed through revolution, but the other royal families have kind of drifted into the distance. We're not really seeing them up front and as public as we're seeing the British royal family. So that's not to say that they're not as important or as intriguing. They're just not as upfront. They have shrunk down. Famously, Queen Margrethe, we know she abdicated and slimmed down her monarchy just before doing that, removing titles and changing responsibilities and roles within her kingdom. So I do think we would have seen the same effect. I think people would have said, what do we need the monarchy for anyway? There's going to be that mixed bag of, likes and dislikes, people that are monarchist or people that are Republicans in the kingdom. And I think, once again, the main idea is that people would have had the same tone of, well, we're never going to see anything like that again. This is the end of a very, very significant era. And I think that would have continued with the public and the Commonwealth. I do think we would have seen that. It was with great sorrow that the Queen passed. So what energy surrounds this alternate 2022 coronation of Queen Anne the First? She would have been Queen Anne the First. Is that correct? Let's ask first, would it have been a bigger coronation with Queen Anne? I have my own personal opinion about why Charles's was a little bit smaller. I think he was under the understanding that he would only be monarch for a brief period of time, health notwithstanding, because of his age, simply because of his age. And I think he said, let's have it be a smaller, still appropriate affair, but we'll do a really big one for William and Catherine when they ascend to the throne. So don't want to overdo it too much within a 20, 30-year spread. Being generous there. So how large would Queen Anne, would she have done a big splashier kind of coronation? Would it have been a bigger deal? Looking backwards, no. I think she would have been fairly efficient, fairly pragmatic, as we have come to expect from her. I think it would have been like, let's just get it done. Let's not spend a whole bunch of money on it. Let's have at it. Off you go. So what kind of energy would have surrounded that coronation? So I do think it would have been greeted with a great deal of, yay, we're going into another phase. It would have been welcomed that mother was passing the baton, or the scepter, if you will, to her daughter. I do think that there would have been a great deal of expectation that she would be a lot like her mother in tone and in rule. I think that would have been the energy surrounding it. Here we go again. We're getting, part two of Queen Elizabeth's reign. Um, hip hip hooray, things look good there. So, the renegade spirit of her, and we all know the story about the attempted kidnapping, where the kidnapper opened her door and said, "Get out," and she said, "Not bloody likely." So, again, tough gal. Interesting, tough gal. I do think that some of that renegade spirit would have been anticipated, and I think there would have been a nice vein of, what is she going to do? Is she going to do something kind of off the wall? Are we going to get more open doors? Now, back in, I think it was the 70s, they did a documentary on the royal family, and they showed them watching TV, and Princess Margaret and I believe Princess Anne both were like, what are we doing this for? It's so stupid. Like, why are people watching us watching TV? Really don't even do this. It was kind of staged and overly done up to make them seem accessible and more human, and nobody wants that. And I think there would have been an expectation of Queen Anne allowing more exposure and interest, but I don't think that that would have happened. I think she would have been following in the tradition of some level of privacy, and to an extent, I do think she would have pulled a veil around the royal family, and not allowed quite so much microscopic examination of them. The business of Harry, I think she would not have permitted something like that with her children specifically, but we'll get to Harry, talking about Todgers and creams and frostbite and whatnot in his book. I don't think that kind. And if you think about it, like, how much do we really know about Princess Anne? How much do we really know about Peter and Zara? Do we know a whole lot about them? No. We're not, I mean, Mike Tyndall's a lot of fun. We hear a lot about Mike Tyndall. So I do think that the public would have expected a bit more of a peek behind the curtain, but I don't think that that would have been allowed. I think she would have kept some mystery about it. Now, this was something, and indulge me here. This was something I did want to look at. Now, she married Mark Phillips. He was a lieutenant in the first Queen's Dragoon Guards. They married. She met him in 1968, and their engagement was announced in 1973. They were married that same year at Westminster Abbey. It was a televised ceremony with an estimated audience of 100 million viewers. That's quite significant. They took up residence at Gatcombe Park, and Phillips was offered an earldom, but he and Anne declined the offer. Both of their children were born without titles. She did want them to be regular people. Peter was born in 1977, and Zara was born in 1981. Between the two of them, they have five. Between the two children, there are 5 grandchildren. However, they did divorce Princess Anne and Mark Phillips in 1989. It was the first royal divorce since Princess Margaret. Since a reigning monarch divorcing was unprecedented, this might have been considered unseemly. Keeping in mind that Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne when Princess Anne was 3. She did not attend the coronation of her mother. The expectation would have been that she would have married for life. So let's ask the first question. And this may jam up my whole outline. If Anne had been the heir apparent, would she have married Mark Phillips at all? This potentially takes this reading in a whole different direction, guys. Would she have married Mark Phillips at all if she was the heir? Yes, she would have. She would have married him. That lover's card is definitely a yes. It is contracts. It is agreements, promises made, promises kept, that kind of business. So we will put that back in the deck. We're going to put it back in the deck. So would they have remained married to avoid scandal? Yes, but I do think if the marriage started to go in a different direction, I think they would have uh, obtained separate residences without anyone knowing. It would have been secret. I think they would have slept apart. So, does this mean separate master bedrooms in the same location, or separate bedrooms within their quarters in Windsor, their quarters in Buckingham Palace, et cetera, et cetera? I do think so. I think they would have ultimately, both of them, really adhered to the rules of the Hierophant. When I read the Hierophant, I always read it as a seat of power. I always read it as the rules and regulations that are to be followed. So here we've got rules and regulations. This is what we're following. This is what we're doing. They would have been, I don't want to say they would have been faking it, because I do think that many a royal couple have hit the skids and said, we'll hang out and just kind of do what we have to do. We can lead our separate lives. Allegedly, Prince Philip had a number of dalliances and relationships. I'm not going to speculate on that in this particular reading. So we could maybe talk about that later if you want. But I do think that they would have maintained their residence and um, kept things up for the purposes of public consumption. Would her reign have tolerated the stress of an unhappy marriage? There we go again. So, absolutely, I do think that the reign would have been fine. Um, I think they would have been busy with their own patronages, their own things. Something about him, like, playing tennis all the time. Like, I'm getting that he played, I don't know if he even played tennis. Um, Mark Phillips. I'll have to look that up. There's nothing in any of my research that that says that. But they did announce their plans to separate in 1989, and they were romantically linked to other people. And while they shared custody of their children, they announced initially that there were no plans for divorce. It wasn't until 1992 that she had actually filed for divorce. And that was following the what followed was the relationship with Sir Timothy Lawrence. So, but in this reading, we're not going to go into that because, well, maybe we should. Let's take a look at that. Would she have taken up a clandestine relationship with Timothy Lawrence, Sir Timothy Lawrence? So, a little bit about him. He was a commander in the Royal Navy, and he was serving on the Royal Yacht Britannia. The relationship developed in 1989. He was also appointed equerry to the Queen 3 years prior to that. So some of their letters were released. They married in 1992, December of 1992. Only 30 guests were invited to the private service. This was done up in Cracky Kirk near Balmoral Castle. The Church of Scotland did not consider the marriage to be binding, as it does not permit the remarriage of divorced persons. So See. Do. Would she have taken up with Timothy Lawrence had she been queen? Clandestine relationship. I don't think they would have formally married. Well, they couldn't if she was still married to somebody else. I don't think they would have formally taken up like a cohabitation or a living situation. I just don't think that that would have happened. I think the living situation would have remained with Mark Phillips. And I think Timothy Lawrence would have been an affair of the heart more than an affair of the whole self. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't think that would have been very fitting for both of them. I don't think they would have liked it. So how would the children have been affected by a non-divorced but distant royal couple? Now, remember, I'm saying I think they would have maintained some kind of household. Peter up top. Zara down below. So Peter, I think it would have changed his perspective on how relationships work. I think it would have complicated the way that he looked at how relationships worked, and he would have seen them as very complicated and why bother getting involved in them. Zara, on the other hand, I think has a lot of her grandfather and her mother in her. And I think she would have said, well, why don't you just get on with it? Like, why are we doing all this pretending? Why live two lives when you can very easily live one? So I think we would have had possibly more negative damage done to Peter. So that's going to bring us to the heir. Well, we'll wait on the heir. Let's talk a little bit about her leadership style. I do think she would have led more like her father, somewhat like her mother, but I think her personality is just way too much Prince Philip. So, especially because there's so much going on in the world, I'm wondering how she would have affected that. I'm wondering how she would get along with Donald Trump. She's famously no nonsense, independent, and she is labeled as the hardest working royal in the royal family. She does way more engagements than her brother, and then most of the other royal family members. She's pretty much a workaholic, so good for her. Love that. If you don't have a purpose in life, you're just gonna fizzle and rot. Would Queen Anne have modernized the monarchy faster? Would she have clung to tradition like her mother? Would she have tried to keep that sweet, nostalgic vibe of the royal family? Nine of Cups. Page of Cups. I don't think she would have modernized things. In fact, I almost feel, and I do think that Charles is doing the same thing. I think Charles is very respectful of tradition, despite the friction that it may cause within the courtiers, within the palace, within the public opinion. I think he really does try, notwithstanding his lean into environmentalism. I think that in his eyes, that or in his mind, that's just being educated and responsible. And I think that that's okay. I think I don't have any issue with that. I don't even drop any comments about the WEF. So we're not going there. We're not going there in this reading. Maybe later. But I think that she would have tried to stay the course and keep as many traditions in place as possible. I think that would have the stability of the family and the monarchy is something that she was much more keen on, and we can see that in her actions today. So I think she would have really stayed the course, and if someone said to her, "Hey, we need to do this a little bit differently to wrap our arms around modern times," I don't think she would have been very yielding to that. Just my thoughts. I think that the tradition would have outweighed modernization. So, would she have restructured royal duties to tighten the monarchy? Would she have gone with this shrinking royal family? Would she have done that? Emperor, Magician, Queen of Pentacles, Nine of Wands, and the Sun. I don't think she would have shrunk the monarchy. I don't think she would have. I think she would have um, given out appropriate duties for appropriate position and appropriate accident of birth. I think she would have passed out what she needed to whom she needed to. She's especially gifted at understanding what tool is appropriate for a particular job. So I do like that about her. I do feel it is very, very astute of her to say this particular person would be excellent as patron of this particular event. This person would be extra sparkly at this event. So interesting. So I don't think she would have tightened up the monarchy quite as much as Charles is. I think she would have brought some other characters into the fray. So how would she have handled scandals? Now I know these erupted during Queen Elizabeth's reign, but once you become monarch, you got to deal with the messes left behind. How would she have dealt with the Andrew situation? Here we go. So I do think that Andrew would have been removed from common sight. I think he would have remained on the website. I think he would have remained in the line of succession. I think he possibly would not be a counselor of state, but as her brother, I think he still would have had an opinion. And I think she would have sought that opinion. I do think he would have been tucked away. Now, if that is at Royal Lodge, perhaps, but I feel she would have sent him to the north, not to sound like Game of Thrones here, but I do think she would have sent him north. I think she would have said, listen, go up into the country. You know, you're going to have everything that you need up there. We'll get you sorted out. Is that the worst possible thing for him? No. I do think that at some point she would have said, okay, Andrew, we need you to spill your secrets and we need to know what we're dealing with. I think even now, she doesn't think that he was forthcoming with everything that he knew or everything that happened. So she would not have banished him, but she would have really made his presence very small. No more balconies, no more public events, no more big public events. You're not walking to church on Christmas or Easter or anything like that. I think she would have done that, but I do think she would have maintained a relationship with him in the spirit of Queen Elizabeth. We did see that Queen Elizabeth did that as well. So, and I do think she would have retained his counsel, but in a casual sense. If she was reigning monarch, what would she do with the whole Harry situation? And it's presuming that Harry would be marrying poorly, having a lot of things to say about the royal family, even if he was a lesser person. How would she have handled the Harry situation? She would have been done with them. This, she would have said, you have made your bed and you are going to lie in it. You are going to go away. This, I think, is most important. And this suggests substances, overindulgences, those kinds of things. And I think she would have said, you can go out into the world, nary a pentacle here. So I don't think he would have been sent off with any kind of money, but go into the world and create good fortune for yourself. This is a one-way door. If you are leaving the royal family, you are leaving and not coming back. This is an exclusive family. And if you divorce us, you divorce us all. And I do think I think this would have been a much, much more hardline approach to the problem that is Harry. The problem that is Harry. So now, Princess Anne had a relationship with Andrew Parker Bowles at one point, 1970s. Now, you know him from Queen Camilla. How would Queen Anne's relationship with Camilla be if she were monarch and Camilla still was married to Charles? Oh, that's not bad. Professional, not emotional. I don't think that they are braiding each other's hair at night. I think it's a little odd for them to sit and have a conversation. I don't think she leans into Camilla for counsel or anything like that. What's done is done, though. We have that world card, and it really is what's done is done. Those relationships were back in the 70s. We're not really consumed with them now. I'm over it. Didn't really care one way or the other. So in these kinds of circles, I think there's some overlap in relationships like that. Yeah, historically, if royals were only allowed to marry royals, and we know this from the issues with hemophilia and the Habsburg chin, marrying from a small pool of royals, you're going to get some overlap. That's why many of the royal families can connect to other royal family members. Famously, the remains of Tsar Nicholas II, the executed Russian Tsar, the last Tsar of all the Russias. The remains were identified partly by Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip's DNA. He offered up some DNA because he does trace his lineage to that family. And there are, shared connections there. The Tsar's wife, Empress Alexandra, was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. So there is some very interesting overlap there, making Charles not only a descendant of the Russian imperial family, but also the British royal family. So there's lots of different lines that we can connect here. So Princess Anne as well, or in our reading here, Queen Anne. So which of her children, Queen Anne, which of her children would have been the better successor? Now, Peter is older, so by chronology, he would be the heir. But which of them would have been better? We already saw that Peter may have been troubled by a marriage in construction only with his parents. Whereas Zara would have said, well, why don't we just get on with it and go live our best life. So who would have been the better ruler? Here's Peter. Oh yeah, we're doing a reveal. This is Peter. This is Zara. So I think Peter would have nurtured the foundations, and I do think that his lack of being progressive would have not served him well. There is a certain amount of insecurity that I get about branching out with the royal family and the way that things function. I don't think he would have been comfortable with saying, "Hey, we're going to revolutionize thing." He's not a revolutionary person. He feels very much dependent on the traditions and the courtier system. If he were the heir to the throne. Now, Zara would have been more progressive, even though she does. I mean, she's married to Mike Tyndall. Come on, Mike Tyndall's awesome. Um, she would have been more progressive in her reign. I do think there is something much more fun about Zara. She would have been almost like the Jolly Queen, the Jolly Queen Zara, if she were the one to ascend. But I think there was a frivolity in her that would not necessarily be acceptable in a monarch position. So I think that Peter would have been seen as very stoddy and kind of just playing it by the book. And I think Zara would have been seen as a bit more giddy and frivolous and not really a serious leader. And I don't mean that she is giddy and not serious now, but I think that that's what would have been presented. I think that's really what they would have done. Neither Zara and Peter have royal titles even now, and decline them. They are just regular people now. So, very interesting. Very interesting, guys. So, a lot of fun we had here today. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think the monarchy would have been like if Queen Anne had been born first and if she had ascended to the throne? Do you think that the monarchy would have been stronger? Do you think it would have been more disciplined? Do you think the monarchy would be more or less relevant today? Do you think that do you think that the subjects of the United Kingdom would have preferred a Princess Anne to a King Charles, or a Queen Anne to a King Charles? Let me know down in the comments how you feel about it. Also, do you think she would have stayed in a marriage or tried harder with her marriage with Mark Phillips to avoid a scandal? Do you think she would have really run that risk? I mean, I think she is definitely a little bit of a risk taker. So, um, I I I I I think maybe she would have leaned into the crown, but she still would have done what she had to do on the side. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. I especially want to hear from my Commonwealth viewers and my British subjects, because this is your what if. I did this for you guys, and just to see what would have happened had we had a different line of succession. So thank you as always for watching this. Drop your comments down below. Let me know if you want to see more what ifs here, and I will see you in the future.